set up to look at it. I am so glad that he's actually taking the recommendation. Any way you slice it, folks, you have $1.1 trillion. It's not sustainable. You have to cut it. Which one of the cats you skin, I don't know. But whatever you do, you need to get in a sustainable mode of budget. Right now, we pay $260 billion in interest every year.
They're talking about raising the debt ceiling next month, which they have to do. Otherwise, the U.S. would, for the first time in its history, default on some of these loans that we receive from these other nations. So there's a whole other battle to be fought next month about this debt ceiling. So you just got past the government shutdown, which you had an nth hour agreement. Which, by the way, if you're into D.C. politics, you're quite embroiled on that front because D.C. was one of the trading chips or bargaining chips, if you will, that the president traded away in order to get to this compromise, which of course has D.C. officials quite up in arms. We had our mayor locally here arrested over this past week just to try to protest the kind of bargaining that's occurring in and around D.C., and D.C. doesn't get to participate in these politics. It does not have a vote. It has electoral votes, which makes me think that, you know, while the president thinks he's very cushy and comfortable here in D.C., come 2012, he's going to have a hard time justifying his position and his compromise that he made.
That's true. But now let's come to the point of raising taxes, which is one of the suggestions of the Obama plan. Folks, if you were to go from 35% tax, what it is today, to let's say that you raise it to 45% on these rich people, how much are you going to get?
Who are the rich people?
About $130 billion. You're in deficit for $1.1 trillion. Unless you take all the money from the rich people, you ain't making that on an every year basis. So another plan that I believe that's very good. Take away all the loopholes, 25% flat tax for anyone over $200,000. You will get more money that way.
But your point is that even if you got all that money, it still would barely scratch the surface of our debt situation. It's almost unavoidable that we look at these major mortgages that we carry, i.e. Social Security, Defense, and Medicare, Medicaid. But the reality is, how much appetite does the American public have to make some significant cuts in those areas, which apparently is the only way forward for us to get out of this. One of the topics we talk about frequently here on Darshan is the decline of print media. You know, over the past several years, probably the last decade or so, news readership, print media in particular, has really started to decline in favor of reading news online, or just in general, people are generally going online to find their news versus opening up a newspaper.
People don't want to spend money. They have a reason to get it for free, so they go to websites to get free reading.
It's also convenient, you know, because it's right there at your fingertips on your portable device or on your computer. So there's certainly a convenience that goes along with web versus print. Well, this is all very discouraging if you're in the print media, but there was a couple of articles that came out that were actually quite encouraging if you're in this space. One was in the Washington Post magazine, where it talks about the campus miracle. What they're talking about is the fact that on campuses, newspaper readership is actually booming, which you would not expect, but it is actually booming. They highlighted the Georgetown newspaper, the Hoya. Now, of course, I'm a Maryland alum, and we used to have the Diamondback, which also had a lot of good readership. But actually, what they're finding is that these small newspaper shops that exist on these campuses are doing quite well. And it doesn't represent the model that's happening to the national papers, which are somewhat in decline.
Don't rain on their parade. You know, Mr. Murdoch, through his news organization and with his Wall Street ownership, is coming out. If you want to read my website, you're going to have to pay for it.
Well, you're seeing changes now in that whole space. The New York Times just recently started to charge for its online readership. I think this is the way it's going to have to be, because it's very difficult to make the dollars online. The irony here for the print folks is that while print readership is going down, people are not buying as many newspapers, the fact remains that advertising is far more lucrative on the print side than it ever has been on the web side. You don't make nearly the dollars in advertising on the web that you do in print. So these print media companies who are dabbling in both have to find a way to balance between the money they make online versus the money they're making in print, even though it's declining. But stories like this really provide some spark and some light in that area, because you're finding that young enthusiasts, these students on these campuses, are reading newspapers. In fact, they're wildly interested in these papers. And even though a great majority of these papers are sometimes subsidized by the university, in other words, the university provides some degree of operational funding for these newspapers, some of them, like the Hoya, are actually turning a profit, if you can believe that.
I can believe it.
And the reason, a couple of reasons have been cited here, but, you know, the Hoya is, like many newspapers across campuses, a microcosm of campus journalism, which has a core audience that's a loyal follower to that audience, right? So they're students that care about these topics, and the newspapers are smart. They know their audience. They cater to stories that matter to them.
That's right.
And that's the key point. If you have an avid loyal viewership, you can still make money in print media as long as you target the right content.
You know, for instance, Loose Lips, a city paper. Loose Lips, everyone who follows politics wants to read that.
Because it's gossipy.
It's more than Washington Post, because Washington Post does not cover it all. Loose Lips covers Washington Post and others and gives you a good information on DC politics. That's in the city paper.
And that's one of the other points that was highlighted in this article, is that hyper-local, or providing local news and content, is still an area that is a hole for media. There's a lot of national stories and a lot of national press houses, and there's maybe a lot of local ones, but somewhere in the middle you don't have good coverage.
Yeah.
So for the newspapers that manage to strike at that core group of avid enthusiasts and readers, you can still make money. So the Washington Post equivalently did an article about the myths of the future of journalism. Some of these myths are that traditional news media are losing their audience. They're actually not. They're just converting the audience in different ways. Another myth: online news will be fine as soon as the advertising revenue catches up. Sort of true, but sort of not true. Online advertising does need to go up. It'll never be quite as lucrative as print. Content will always be king. Sometimes it's content, sometimes it's the availability of content. One of the reasons why online viewership succeeds is because it's very easy to get access to it from any of your devices. But at the same time, many people will tell you, rather than power up my device and have to go to some website, it's so much easier to just pick up a paper and read. So you're going to find both kinds of audience. I think what this tells us is that this is an evolving space. There's still money to be made, but people are going to have to be creative, and maybe we can learn something from these little campus newspapers.
Remember, reading newspaper is just not all about news. It's about a habit. It's about ambience. You take the morning cup of coffee or tea. You need to have that newspaper. You can't be looking at the television.
There's something.
They scream at you.